Anywhere you see in the entire world, mass protests have become a common phenomenon. So common that a few years back, we used to witness remonstrances every 1 or 2 years, but now, it is almost every other Tuesday. Whether it is America, China, India, Russia or even the Middle East, you call it, and a protest is going on in that part of the world. But people protesting is justified in some ways. They have their own severe problems. Some hate the government, some are fighting for equality, some have trouble hanging around with cops, but some are just protesting. They do not know what for, but just protesting. We are so used to the protests that even if the entire world comes out on the streets protesting for a new planet, we'll be quite chill. Like, yeah, okay, well, that is just another Tuesday. But what is going on? Why these protests? And do protests really work? Let us find out. To understand the protests, we need to go back to the time when people started protesting. Throwback to the early 16th century, when a guy wrote this book called The 95 Theses. This book somehow initiated a movement. It was the first considerable movement the world had ever seen. Lots of, and I mean it when I say it, lots of people got inspired by this guy and initiated similar campaigns in the upcoming years. But fast forward to the 20th century. It wasn't until that time that people started calling these movements protests. It was a guy, again, but this time with a stick, who used the words "I protest" for the first time in human history. And God bless this guy. The world is just protesting and protesting and protesting ever since. Classical theories proposed that people participate in a protest to express their grievances originating from relative deprivation, frustration, or perceived injustice. In a more simple language, when people feel they cannot trust those in power over them, or there is evident inequality separating them, they begin to revolt. But gone are the days when protesting was just a medium to say or show that you do not approve or agree with something. Protests have transformed from a mere form of expression against injustice into a well-planned practice that benefits someone or something specific, directly or indirectly. Talking about modern protesting, people have different perceptions of protests these days. If we look at the purpose of a protest, it is to direct attention toward injustice and bring a change at the most basic level. While protests succeed driving attention toward controversial issues, they sadly fail to bring a change. Maybe attention is not certainly all that can bring a change. A Princeton study found that public opinion hardly comes to bear on legislation. There is research that protests cannot make a difference, at least not on their own. They can only build an atmosphere and shape a mindset that could potentially have the chance of bringing a change in society. Protests can only demonstrate the significance of a belief to society. Only in extreme circumstances, protests can persuade authorities to look into their work and maybe amend some decisions. But those extreme situations are those when the protesters are willing to take pressing actions for their cause, and which is quite rare in itself. So does that mean that protests do not work? The answer is no. If the cause is so compelling that the protesters do not consider whether a protest works or not and feel morally driven to contribute and show up in large numbers, there can be no way a protest does not work. So do protests really work? Logically, yes, they do, but not only on their own.